All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of Facebook. Welcome to our interview series. If you've been here before, you know what the story is. If you're brand new, welcome. Today we have a very special treat. We've got our regular drummer, but we haven't interviewed him before, so we're going to interview him today. This is the great drummer and composer and educator, recently moved to the Pacific Northwest from New York. This is Stefan Schatz. Stefan, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Kareem.
Of course. Looking forward to this. So, you were born and bred in New York.
Yes. Well, I was born in New York City,
Okay.
But then when I was an infant, my family moved to Tenafly, New Jersey, which is basically right outside of New York City. And if you don't know New Jersey, jazz musicians all know Englewood Cliffs, Van Gelder Studios. Tenafly is like the next town over. So it's northeast New Jersey. That's where I grew up. And then I lived in New York City for 27 years after that.
Right. And so we've talked about this before, but you kind of came from a musical family, or your father was involved with music, or what was the...
Yeah, my family was really not that musical. My dad did inspire me early on. He was a very creative person, and my dad, I think, was a very frustrated musician. Never played an instrument, really, except when he was a little kid. But he worked in recording studios in his early 20s in New York City. And he was Phil Ramone, the great producer, engineer. He was Phil Ramone's assistant engineer for like about 2 years in the early 60s. So my dad was present for like some of the greatest recording sessions that came out of A&R Studios. And my dad was also kind of an amateur photographer. He had a beautiful old Nikon, and I remember in our basement, he like one day uncovered all these incredible black and white photos of like Mingus and like Duke Ellington and Count Basie, Quincy Jones. I mean, he had been at all of these sessions and like met these musicians. And, you know, when he was telling me all this stuff, like I really didn't know who a lot of these people were. I wasn't listening to jazz, but he was always listening to Count Basie and Ahmad Jamal and Dave Brubeck. You know, he wasn't into like the Beatles and like rock and roll. Like my dad was like a jazz guy. So like I think later on my musical tastes kind of moved in that direction because I had that sound in my head from a very early age.
So when you were little and your dad was listening to this type of music, did you enjoy it or not? And the reason I ask is because my dad used to always listen to KNKX, now used to be KPLU, who used to listen to NPR and all that stuff in the music, and I did not like it when I was younger at all. I liked more modern, hip-hop and things of that nature. And then it took me, years, and I came around and enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Was it the same with you? Or?
Same with me. Yeah, I didn't quite understand it. I have an older sister, Amanda, if she's out there, hello. She lives in New York City. She's a little bit older than me, and as the younger brother, I always kind of followed her musical tastes. And there was a radio station in New York called WLIR, and they played like new wave, like Depeche Mode and Erasure and like, The Cure and like all that stuff. So like that's what I was listening to. We were like big Duran Duran fans. I'm totally aging myself. But, that's the stuff that I was listening to, not jazz. And I remember like I had a couple of memories early on. Like my dad took me to a Chico Hamilton concert, and it was like the sound check because my dad, I think, knew Chico or something and like got invited to like backstage before the show. And I got to see like Chico's huge drum set. It was kind of also the same with at my local like Jewish community center. Buddy Rich brought his band, so like I got to see Buddy Rich play, and it was interesting to me. But like drums were like not exactly on my radar yet. Like I was starting to kind of be interested in drums.
Sure. So did you play anything prior to drum? Any instruments? Or
I did. I played when I was really young. My parents got me piano lessons, and I had really like not great experience with the piano lessons. I think it was just a mismatch as far as the situation. It was really, really early on. I can barely remember, but it was like a group lesson or something. And I just remember getting like no personal time with the teacher, and I didn't really enjoy the physicality of the piano at that point. I felt like I didn't have like the coordination or something. And then in third grade, New Jersey, you pick a band or orchestra instrument. So I kind of wanted to play the drums. Like I kind of loved the sound and the look of the drums, but my parents were like, absolutely not. which is kind
Like
of
many parents, yeah.
yeah, like many parents. And it's kind of funny to think now. But my dad was like, well, I played the trumpet. You should play the trumpet. So I played the trumpet for about 3 years, and I really liked brass. I thought it was, trumpet, like when I first got that shiny, beautiful instrument with the buttons, I mean, it really like stayed with me, the feeling of like, wow, this is something totally new and exciting. And but it didn't really last long. Like after about a year and a half, I just found myself like constantly drawn to the drums and like the drum section in the band. I was always like looking at those guys and girls like, oh man, I wish I could just do that. And I begged my dad for like a drum pad and drumsticks, and I just begged him, and he was like, fine, So he brought home a pad and sticks for me one day, and from there, it's like I almost just never looked back. I started playing, like learning all the rudiments myself. Like I told the band director at my elementary school, like, look, I've started playing drums. Like, can I please just like sit in the back also? So I started doing both for about 2 years. Like I played trumpet, and then like after one song, I would like put the trumpet down, run over to the percussion section and play the snare drum, because I was like the only guy who could read, And it was just like, I was a shy kid. So I should say that like, the drums really kind of became my way of expression. Like I felt like I immediately found my voice.
Yeah, I certainly don't get an airness of shyness from you on the drums at all, ever, when we play music together. All right, so when you first started playing drums, and I guess you'd be percussion first in a lot of the school ensembles, when did you get a drum set? And at that time, who were some of the drummers that you liked and were checking out?
Yeah, good question. I would say, I had the pad for like not very long, just a couple of months. And I was very fortunate because, like I said, my father, he kind of had an eye and an ear for music. And he saw how excited and interested I was in the drums. And almost immediately, he got me a drum set. And that's another day that I'll never forget. It's just like I went to this person's house and they had all these drums. It was like a private showroom or something. And I got a CB700 drum set. It was like a student model. And I just started playing drum set like right away. Like I really, like I said, I listened to new wave, and I was like playing to like my favorite songs, and like I was starting to pick up some stuff just, by ear. And then I got a teacher right after that who started showing me how to read and hold the sticks and rudiments and all that stuff, some drum beats. But then there was also another teacher in my hometown who was a percussionist, and he was also the middle school band director. And, he was really inspiring, and I became his student in 5th grade through like middle school. And he was a classical percussionist. So like I was on track to like being a, symphonic like timpanist, like I was super into classical percussion. I think it was partly because of my reading. Like I was playing mallet percussion. Mallet percussion was never really one of my strengths, but it was like, it had to be part of your arsenal, as a percussionist. But I loved playing timpani. I loved the snare drum. I loved hand percussion. I would say the pinnacle of my classical percussion training was like in high school. Like I went to Manhattan School of Music pre-college, and Interlochen in Michigan. I went there one summer, and I was like really into it. But I was starting to feel like that was not the way I should go. Like I felt like jazz was really calling me.
So prior to that, did you have any, a lot of times middle schools or high schools will have jazz bands and things like that. Did you have any encounters with those groups?
Yes. This is like the early 80s we're talking about, So I would
Not
say,
a good time for jazz.
Yeah, I would say jazz education was like almost non-existent. We had a stage band. Yeah, right. And, the band directors who were in my town, like it was like coming out of the 70s. So you could say that there was like an interest in like fusion, but not so much like straight ahead traditional jazz. Yeah. So we were playing like funk and like, disco. Maybe we'd play like a old swing tune, like In the Mood or something. But yeah, in middle school, I played in that. And then when I got to high school, there was a guy who was our band director for 1 year, just my freshman year. And he was amazing. This guy named Ray Case. And I kind of lost track of Mr. Case, but he played drums and he was a great trombonist. He kind of built the marching program at our school, but he took over the jazz program just like and lit it on fire in our high school. Like there was a during the day jazz band, so that was kind of unusual at that time. And most of like the older kids were in that band, but then he found that there were some of us like young bloods, you know, coming up like interested in jazz. So he was like, oh, let's start an after school band for like you guys. It's like a B band. You know, so like my friends and I, who were all like freshmen and sophomores and stuff, like we knew nothing at all, you know, but he would hang out with us and, you know, like it was high school. So it's like on a free period, I would go to his band room and he'd be like, man, check this out. You know, we'd listen to like the Brecker Brothers or something, or he was like super into Gad. So like I was always hearing him like practicing like Gad grooves, you know, on the drums.
For people that know, you're talking about Steve Gadd, the drummer.
Steve Gadd, yes. Yeah. So it's like he was kind of cool and hip. So like, you know, he, and also I should say that I think my interest in straight ahead jazz, you know, besides my dad, Mr. Case, like one of the songs that he asked us to play, I think it might have been the very first song we had to play for the jazz band after school was Milestones. And, you know, like I said, I had heard Glenn Miller and I had heard, you know, like the swing kind of stuff, but like this was a whole new universe to me. And, a great, great drummer named Scott Amendola, and he's on the West Coast. He's been on the West Coast for quite a while. We went to Tenafly High School together. He's about 4 years older than me, but he's always been a great drummer and an inspiration. And I just remember one day being at his house after school, and he's like, man, you're playing Milestones? Well, let me play you that tune, the original. You know, so he put on, like, the record, and it's just like, it was like, boom. You know, it was just like a sonic boom inside my head. I'm sure we've all experienced that as musicians. Something sparks you. And like that sound of Philly Joe, just like, it was like, boom. It was just like a right uppercut. I was like, that's what I want to do. And like from that moment on, I was like, classical percussion in the rearview mirror. Jazz. So.
But you did have that classical foundation, not to, you know, belittle it at all. I mean, you had that strong thing that helps, you know, it can only make you stronger to have, you know, all that classical reading and technique and all that kind of stuff.
I agree.
You know.
It doesn't explain why sometimes I make so many reading errors, but and, you know, I do sometimes regret not having hung in there a little longer with classical percussion, but fortunately, like, as I've sort of, you know, perused the music scene, those skills have definitely come in handy, like playing on Broadway, you know, like playing in pits, like all that stuff. I even got called to do some orchestral work in New York City, you know, and that, you know, like I was super nervous about it, but like I had to remind myself, like, yeah, I did this for a long time, you know, like, you know, and another good friend of mine in New York, another drummer who's also a great timpanist, was just like, man, you know, just open up your ears. Like you're a musician. It's not about being a jazz musician or a classical musician. Like it's just music. Yeah. And that was like very refreshing to hear that because it's true. Yeah. Hard to draw boundaries between genres.
No, I agree completely. Something that you mentioned earlier was that you had a jazz program during the day, which many times now, well, not right now in 2020, but prior to sheltering in place, jazz bands or stage bands or whatever usually get the short end of the stick because administrators don't want to either pay for it, they want it to be extracurricular, so they put it at like 0 hour,
right.
Which means the students have to get up really, really early if they want to participate. So many of them just by proxy don't do it, and the parents don't want to get up and put in the time. So it's always refreshing for me to see schools that have jazz programs that are like actually built into a regular school day as opposed to, you know, off in the distance, you know.
Absolutely. So. Yeah. And the sad thing was Mr. Case left after the first year, and then another band director came in who was more of like a concert band guy. Nothing to slight him, but the jazz program just kind of dwindled. You know, it was sort of like I could imagine they said like, well, you know, you have to sort of teach the jazz ensemble. And he was like, oh, you know, it was just part of the gig, you know, whereas before it was like, yeah, the jazz ensemble. You know, now it was just kind of like, you know, he was doing the best job he could. So I pursued a lot of stuff outside of school.
Well, I was going to ask you, were there venues and places where you could go and hear jazz at that time or where you were living?
Yeah. You know, this was before, like, Smalls and all of that stuff. But one of our good friends in Tenafly, the dad, he owned the Bottom Line. And if you're familiar with New York City, the Bottom Line was a great old music venue. It's now closed for many years, but I think like Bob Dylan got his start there, and like Bruce Springsteen, and it was like a really unbelievable place. And he would invite us all the time to like shows. And this was like my introduction to, I want to say, quote unquote, jazz, because like a lot of the bands that came in there were like fusion bands, but amazing musicians like John Scofield Trio, with Dennis Chambers and Gary Granger. Like I heard those guys like 100 times, when I was in middle and high school. I mean, just like to hear that stuff live was just unreal. Steps Ahead came in a bunch. Brecker with his own quartet. I heard one of the greatest shows ever. I heard there was Jerry Allen with Al Foster. Woo! I mean, like some unbelievable music, So I was really fortunate, to be able to just like go there as a kid, with my parents or whoever, and just absorb all of that music. It was great.
Yeah, well, you mentioned Philly Joe Jones. When jazz kind of started taking hold and really, grabbing you, who were some other drummers that you like? These are some of my guys that I really like, Or...
Right. Sorry, you did ask me that earlier on. Before Philly Joe, like I was really into like Stuart Copeland. Like if you want to talk about rock drummers, I really loved Copeland and Steve Gadd. But so Philly Joe like really caught my imagination. And then once I decided I wanted to pursue jazz, my parents started signing me up for like jazz camps. So I went to Eastman up in Rochester, New York, which had a really great program. And I started to really like pour over Max Roach. And I should say Max Roach's birthday, January 10th, coming up. He's one of my absolute heroes. At Eastman, I think I did a project, like when one of my like jazz history classes, they were like, choose an artist and just kind of like, just do like a research project and study some of their music. And I just remember sitting in that music library, like just basically discovering Clifford Brown, Max Roach. And I was just like, whoa, it's just like, it really, that spoke to me. So Max was like way up there. Art Blakey. I met a wonderful teacher when I was in high school, Marvin Boogaloo Smith. He is also one of my mentors, like one of the greatest teachers I've ever had. And he was kind of an Elvin follower, disciple.
You're talking about Elvin Jones.
Elvin Jones.
Yeah,
Elvin Jones from Coltrane's quartet. And, Marvin, like really, it was like, it went beyond technique, like what we were doing with, like with studying drums. Like he was really talking about something more spiritual and conceptual. And I was only in high school at the time, but as a kid, this was like an amazing opportunity for me. Every week I would go to Marvin's house and we'd sit in his basement and he would just talk about the universe, and then like 2 hours later, he's sitting behind the drums playing something, and, I'd record everything. And I just knew like, okay, a lot of this I'm not really getting because it's beyond me right now, but like at some point, I'm going to just be like sitting behind the drums or, whatever, like anywhere, and suddenly something will just strike me like, oh my God, like that really makes sense now. And so Elvin was also like, he's up there for me. I got to hear Elvin live a few times, and that was incredible to see and hear. I heard Blakey live once. I wish I had heard him more. Art Taylor, became a huge hero of mine, and he was around New York, when I was coming up, so I got to hear him a lot. Roy Haynes, Louis Hayes, all these guys, like, were just in New York. So it was like, it's like these legends just walking the streets. It was incredible.
At the time, I mean, it was just another day at home for you, right? I mean, just because you grew up there, correct?
It was still special. Like I said, I grew up in New Jersey, so like for me going to New York City and like hanging out in jazz clubs or meeting these, it was still like mind blowing. It's not, I don't take it for granted, that I got a chance to hear these people live and spend time with them. I mentioned Smalls, like when I got to the new school, Smalls was just starting up. This is a long time ago, like the early 90s. And Smalls, if you don't know, it's a great jazz club. They live stream everything now. It's a wonderful, resource. But that was the place that we all hung out, until 6 a.m, and that's where I made all of my first, really lasting connections and relationships with people. Like, oh, I met you at Smalls. Yeah, let's get together and play a session.
Well, so prior to Smalls, while you were still in high school, were you getting together with your friends and playing gigs and bands and things of that nature?
Yeah, yes. Well, my first band was a duo in middle school with a keyboardist, and we played like Jump by Van Halen. Not that well, at least from the drum standpoint. And then we built that into like a bigger band, and we were basically just like a pop cover band, that like lasted into high school. We were called Gentlemen Unknown. I think I named that band. And, there were no ladies in the band. We did have guest ladies, and we should have, we should have like honored that, but, we didn't know any better. But, once I got really into jazz, and I felt like, this is something that I want to pursue outside of school and outside my circle of friends, because like none of my friends were really as into jazz as I was, at least playing jazz. So from my hanging out in New York a little bit, I started to meet some musicians like Chris Byars, the saxophonist, Ari Roland, the bass player, another bass player, Mike Bitts. These guys were all playing in the McDonald's jazz band. There was like a tri-state jazz band, which you try out for every year. And I think it was maybe Mike Bitts, and he was the bass player, and he was like, there's all these guys in the band, and they want to get together and play. So he told them about me, and that we wanted to, just get a band together. So we put a quartet together called Spontaneous Combustion. Thank you, Cannonball. Yeah. And we actually started like working on some serious stuff, arranging standards and stuff like that. And those were some of my first professional jazz gigs, when I was still in high school.
Okay, I was going to say this is prior to the New School. So how did you, out of all the great schools that are over there, how did you come to settle on the New School?
Good question. So my senior year, I got into the McDonald's All-American Marching Band. I think that was the last year that it existed. They chose 2 seniors from every state, so I was like in this awesome drum line. And I think through that, they offered a bunch of different scholarships to schools, and the New School was not one of them. The New School at the time was really just starting out. Arnie Lawrence, the great saxophonist, had started the school, and it just seemed like he had pieced together an administration and a faculty. But the year I was at Eastman, I met a piano player, Dave Grousman, and he was going there. I think he was already in college, but he was at Eastman for the summer. I hope I have my chronology correct. But he was like, man, you would love the New School. Like, myself and Brian Fletty, a drummer, we were both there at the same time, and he would just talk and talk and talk about how great it was. And I told my parents that I really was interested in this school. I'm like, let's just see what it's all about. So they looked at it. They were interested, but they said, look, if you go to the New School, you have to do the dual degree program. My parents did not want me to do a music degree only. And I thanked them for that. At first I thought, well, that's not great because, I want to devote all my time to playing music. But they're like, no, you should get an education. And the New School, like, you can sign, if you got into the New School, you also got into Eugene Lang College, which was a very kind of liberal, small, like, liberal arts school. And I did a 5-year program, like, full-time. And I got a music degree, and I got a degree in English and writing. So I did a lot of creative writing. And I had an awesome time. Like, I just felt, I had some moments while I was at the New School where, I felt like I was kind of pulled in a couple of different directions. Like, I started out like, I'm a musician. And then like by year 5 or 4, I was kind of like, well, maybe I'm going to be a film editor, because I was working in film editing, and maybe I'll work in TV, or maybe I'll be a writer. I had all these ideas. But I think for me, there was like a moment where I was like, no, I'm a musician. Like, I think about this all the time. I dream about it. Like, and, but the New School, that's how that came about.
Well, I'm curious, who were some of the instructors on the faculty at the time when you were there?
Yes. The full-time faculty, I think, has not changed much over the years from what I understand. So Reggie Workman, the bass player, was there from the get-go. Like I said, Arnie Lawrence, a great saxophonist. There were a lot of bass players. Buster Williams was there. Cecil McBee. Cecil Bridgewater was there. Jimmy Owens. Let me see, who else? There were a million people. The drum teacher who I studied with when I first got there was Keith Copeland, who I believe is in Europe. And he's a great teacher. That's Benny Powell was there too, and Charlie Persip, the drummer. I mean, it was just like the who's who of jazz was on the faculty.
Well, we talked about this a little bit too. We have a mutual friend, Ollie Jackson, who I knew later in his life, but you were at the new school when he came to the new school.
Yes.
A wonderful drummer, and his father was he came from a musical family, and yeah, and his two teachers, from what I understand, when he was young, were Philly Joe Jones and Max Roach, right? So I mean, it doesn't get any better than that.
Yeah, exactly.
Not to just to stray from, what was it like when Ollie came into school at the time? He was rather young, wasn't he?
He was young, yeah. So when before Ollie came to the new school, I mean, I had been there for a couple of years. I can't remember. You might know exactly what year he got there, but I feel like I had been there for maybe 2 or 3 years at this point. But I played a lot with his cousin, Carlos McKinney, great piano player. And we were in like a new school ensemble together. We like traveled the country together. And I just remember Carlos telling me like, oh man, like my cousin Ali Jackson, he's coming to New York, man. Look out for this guy. And I was like, yeah, I'm sure he's great. And I think he might have even played me or like a bootleg recording or something. You know, I was just like, whoa, you know, when I heard Ali play. And, you know, Ali definitely, he had like a wake, you know, in front of him and behind him before he got to New York. Like he, you know, and I'll have to say, like, I was kind of jealous, you know, because like I didn't come from a musical family. You know, like here's a guy who like came from music royalty in Detroit, you know, where he like lived and breathed music. And, you know, and even Carlos, like besides being a wonderful piano player, like I learned that he was an incredible like classical harpist. I mean, these guys were like just shooting from all cylinders, you know, and I think I heard Ali is also like a wonderful piano player. He's obviously an incredible composer. So yeah, when he came to the new school, it was like, I just mowed everybody down.
Well, also, I mean, you've mentioned some of the other classmates. I mean, Matt Jorgensen here from Seattle was one of your classmates, and then you tell the story. Who else did you go to school with while you were there?
Yeah, I mean, there was some amazing people there. Brad Meldau was there, the piano player. He had left, and then he came back like some years later to sort of finish his degree, and you know, he was already the great Brad Meldau. So we were like, what, Meldau is coming back to school? Why? You know, I guess he wanted his degree. Who else was there? Great drummer Adam Cruz, who was like a great friend of mine, and another great drummer who's not on the jazz scene but is a wonderful rock drummer, a guy named Matt Johnson, who like played on the Jeff Buckley record Grace, which is like one of the greatest records. So yeah, Matt's a great friend. My immediate peers were drummer Joe Strasser. I mentioned Brian Floody, Sam Yahel, the piano player, organist.
Didn't you say Peter Bernstein was around at the time as well? Or
Pete Bernstein was not at the school, but he was on the scene. You know, like my first couple years at the new school, it was not unusual, you know, to like be walking the halls of like our crummy little new school building and hearing like, you know, it was like Meldau and Jorge Rossi and Jorge's brother, like maybe Mario Rossi, like all these guys, and like Chris Potter, you know, like just playing, you know, in a rehearsal room. We're just like listening to this, just like freaking out, you know, and it was just like, it was an incredible experience.
Anything while you were there? I mean, you know, many colleges have music programs, but, and I can remember like when I was in school, some classes that I took that were really helpful and influential for me. Do you have any similar things about the new school that you thought, man, this was, I mean, aside from just the great players and hearing them play and you know, these sessions?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, again, I was there for 5 years, so like I covered a lot of ground. I would say like one that immediately comes to mind is another good friend, Lauren Schoenberg, the great saxophonist and jazz historian. he taught a class which, like, to this day I've held as like one of the greatest classes I took there. You know, Lauren was like interested in just art, you know, like it wasn't just jazz. I mean, I think it was called like form and structure in classical jazz or something like that. But really we did like Shakespeare, we listened to Brahms, we like would analyze, you know, Brahms symphonies. He had us watching like old black and white movies of like, you know, like Laurel and Hardy, or, you know, like that kind of stuff. And it was just amazing, this stuff. And it really appealed to that part of me that was sort of like fancied myself like a Renaissance man, you know, because I was doing this dual degree and I was like writing poetry and all this stuff. And, you know,
Roses are red, violets are black.
Yeah, exactly. So I liked that class a lot. I liked that Lauren was kind of thinking outside the box, you know, because everything else was really like, you know, kind of jazz focused. So that was cool. I also, had nothing to do with music, but I had to take like, I can't remember how it came about, but we were part of Parsons School of Design, the great art school. And I always loved drawing. Drawing was one of my first passions as a kid. I drew for hours and hours. And I took a life drawing class. And like that class really opened up my mind, because I always kind of thought of myself as like kind of a perfectionist, and kind of hard to be a jazz musician and be a perfectionist at the same time, you know, because, you know, like Art Blakey says, like, if you're going to make a mistake, make it loud. And like, that was not in my creed, you know, it was like, no mistakes. That was like the classical musician in me. And this class, you know, the teacher was just like, you know, I mean, like gesture drawing, you know, like, and I know it sounds a little bit pretentious, but, you know, it really got me to think like in bigger strokes, you know, like not to look at the like minutia. And like that really conceptually, is like someone, you know, who's improvising, like that really spoke to me, to kind of get out of my sort of, you know, like my mold of it's got to be this way. No, it can be that way. So those were two classes that really stick out for me.
Right on. Well, there's lots of things I want to ask about, because you basically lived your entire life growing up and gigging and working and playing all over New York, lots of different types of music and with lots of different artists, and touring the world.
Yes.
And then I want to ask about, you know, moving to the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, sure.
But before we get to that, because I want to do this before we run out of time, I want to ask
please.
about your experience with the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra, because they had a blind audition throughout the entire world, basically, and you made it all the way to the end and got to perform with Lincoln Center and Wynton Marsalis and McCoy Tyner and Charles Lloyd?
McPherson.
Charles McPherson, excuse me. So can you talk a little bit about how you even came to hear about that and that situation?
Yes. Well, I'll try to keep it short. I mean, it's like, I don't know how much time we have. I'm not keeping it. Okay. So, I mean, playing in the jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra has been a dream of mine for a long, long time. I mean, as early as the 90s, like when I was a kid at the new school, like I was so enamored with the band and the way they sounded, and Wynton, and like everything like Wynton stood for. You know, a friend of mine introduced me to like Wynton's music when I was first coming up, like Black Codes from the Underground was like one of my favorite records, Live at Blues Alley. I mean, I've like poured over these records, and like Tane. So
Jeff Tane Watts.
Tane Watts.
They don't know who you're talking about.
The editorial, I appreciate that. And you know, I got to meet Wynton actually through my dad. So my dad was doing something through a radio station, and this is just going back. I'll try to speed through the story. And interviewed Wynton. So like we went to Wynton's apartment and like, you know, got to talk to Wynton a little bit. And I said, like, you know, Wynton, I would love to come to a rehearsal, like watch you guys. Like I love the orchestra. So I started like going to the rehearsals. You know, now like they open up the rehearsals. Like there's tons of people at the orchestra rehearsals. But then it was like nobody was there. They would rent a space, and then like, you know, you would go and just chill and watch them play. And at the time it was Herman Riley and Reginald Veal. And I remember hearing them rehearse Blood on the Fields. And like, the sound of Herman and Reginald Veal just like was so amazing to me. So ever since that time, I really wanted to play in the band. You mentioned Ollie Jackson. So Ollie was in the band for a while, you know, so he was another connection. I would drop in once in a while and listen to them. And then I was here in Seattle. This was a couple years ago. And I think we were at a gig together. And Jacob Zimmerman came in, and we were sitting at the bar, and he was like, you know what, man? Like, I saw this thing about Lincoln Center. They're looking for a drummer. And, like, I almost fell on the floor. And I was like, this is it. And then I think we were talking about it, you and I, Kareem, and I think you like to say that I was, like, a little hesitant. Like,
you were.
I mean, I was unpacking a lot of baggage. I had left New York City, I wasn't sure, like, if I fit in that scene anymore. And you were like, no, man, do it.
Well, I need to interject here, and the reason I say this is because apparently when Lincoln Center was looking for a drummer and putting out the call for people to apply, there were all of these criteria that people had to do, and it was going around the internet, and everyone was basically saying, this is a joke, this is impossible, nobody can do it, and and number one, I thought that was kind of like, well, why give up before you even try? Which, and then you were saying, well, I don't know, should I do this? I'm like, you are a great drummer. Yes, you should apply for this, and so take it from there.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad I did. I was able to kind of weed through all of that stuff that was on the application. Yeah, they listed all of these, Brazilian grooves, Afro-Cuban grooves, and I was like, all right, I'm just gonna I'm gonna just cut through the fine print and just like I said, the big strokes. And they really wanted to hear somebody who had knowledge of different genres of big band drumming, and it was the summertime, and the deadline I think was maybe 2 months away or something for the all the materials. And I've been teaching full time here in Seattle Public Schools, and I didn't have work over the summer, so I was like, I have nothing but time. So for about 2 or 3 weeks, I just set out practicing each of the charts that I was deciding I was going to play to show off the different genres. I had a little Zoom recorder. I was listening along to the tracks, and I think I maybe did one tune every day. They asked for I think 8 different tracks or something. So like I said, over the course of a couple weeks, by day I would be recording, and by night I'd be sort of mastering and editing the stuff that I had done and labeling, because it was so much labeling it was a blind audition, so you couldn't put your name on anything. And I was like, you know what? Screw it. I'm just, the worst thing that can happen is nothing will happen. And that's fine. I've been in a lot of situations where you go out for something and it doesn't work out. I've, record contracts and all kinds of stuff, audition for Broadway shows. I mean, it's just a lot of rejection as a musician. You just have to weather the storm. And at the end of the day, you have to believe in yourself. And, I really felt like I might have had a shot, because again, I had played on After Midnight, which was basically Jazz at Lincoln Center, Duke Ellington Broadway show. I was subbing for Alvester Garnett, and that was basically playing with the orchestra.
Right, and prior to that, you had done, from what I understand, some work for Lincoln Center on State Department tours, touring around the world and playing, correct?
Yes, yeah. For a few years.
We'll get to that. I want to continue on with this process here.
Yeah, so
this story of victory.
That's right, the victory lap. So yeah, I sent in my stuff, and I think in the end of August, this was maybe 2018, maybe. They got in touch with me and they said, congratulations, you've been selected as a finalist or semi-finalist, in our search. And they got in touch with me, and they flew me out to New York. I should back up a second. They gave me a whole bunch of other music to learn and prepare for the blind audition. And I have to say, it felt really great. I mean, just getting invited to the semifinals. It was very emotional for me, because I had left New York, and this is sort of, I guess, piggybacking on your question about moving to the Pacific Northwest. My wife got a job here, so I hadn't planned on leaving New York. So I had to leave a lot of my musical family and my career behind in New York, and that was tough. Imagine being somewhere for 27 years. So I'll never forget, flying over Manhattan that time. And it was I almost burst into tears, because it was it felt so, it was so many years waiting to be acknowledged to play with them. And And, again, I was sort of throwing caution to the wind. It was sort of a eventful day. I was on another tour in the Midwest, almost missed my flight to New York. That's a whole other story. But thank goodness, there was divine intervention, and the people of Southwest Airlines were like, here's another flight. And I was like, yes, thank you. But, the blind audition, I couldn't see them. They couldn't see me. I was sitting for hours waiting, for my turn by myself. I wasn't in a room with a bunch of drummers, so I didn't know how many other semifinalists there were. They were really keeping everything pretty secretive. And, I had prepared as best I could, and I went in there, and I didn't know if I'd be playing with live musicians. I didn't know if I'd be playing to a track, if they would ask me to play a songo. I had no idea what they were going to ask me to do. And there was a moderator who told me that he couldn't answer any of my questions, so it was everything was tight-lipped. But he's like, I think you might be playing with a trio. And I went in, I'm like, okay, that's cool. So they were behind a curtain, and I wasn't allowed to talk or make any noise because they didn't want to know if you were male, female, nothing. If you had to cough, they're like, go outside. I had to communicate through the moderator. But I started playing the first tune with them. They were the ones who were saying what we were going to play. All right, let's start with such and such. And it was just a rhythm section, but it was kind of incredible because at some point in that first or second tune, Wynton started playing, and you just know that sound. If you've listened to his records as much as I have, it really it sent chills up my spine. When he started playing, it was. I was almost going to burst into tears because it was the sound and the energy coming out of his horn. And then from there, more and more instruments entered. I heard, oh, there's some trombones back there. Oh, here's a couple saxophones. So they had a octet or tentet or something, but it was fun. I just had fun. Yeah. And I think that they sensed that. So I left the audition, and they literally called me back while I was, sitting and talking to my wife in Lincoln Center Plaza. They're like, yeah, we'd like you to come back tomorrow for the live audition. And I think I had a Ghostbusters moment. I was in the middle of spinning around like Bill Murray, If they had seen me, they're like, what a goofball. Yeah. And then the next day I was at Dizzy's Club, and the live audition, I could see them, they could see me. And then I'll admit, the pressure felt like it was on. But, I did my best, and, Wynton was great. A week after my audition, he spent an hour with me on the phone and talked to me about every song we played, and oh, this was great, man. Oh, think about this next time. And I was taking notes, everything he said, because I was thinking maybe if down the road they invite me back, these are things that he's going to be, boxes he's going to be checking off. So it gave me something to work on and work towards for the next several months. And they invited me to play some concerts, a few months later, and it was nerve-wracking, exciting. I had a great time. I guess the political thing to say is they haven't chosen a drummer. There's a sort of a revolving door right now, but I'm just so grateful to have gotten that opportunity. And, it's that's a box I kind of was happy to check, dream come true. It's I was called up to the majors, and that's kind of how it felt. And hopefully it'll happen again. I don't know if it will or not, but it was, I'm glad that we, talked about it. You encouraged me to do it. Sometimes I know in my life that unless I get a good push, sometimes I'm I don't know.
I'm always happy to push. You just
yeah. So it was a great experience, and I was very fortunate to have it. So.
Right on. Well, we're all very happy for you, as we've said many times. And like I said, selfishly, I love the fact that you live here because we get to work together. But yeah, if you get the call and you need to leave, just live here and fly there and fly back. That's what we want you to do.
Yeah, that would be okay.
Well, okay. We're at the 15-minute mark, so if anybody has any questions for myself or Stefan, please leave a comment, and we'll do our best to get to it if we can. So we'll just keep talking here, but if any comments come in, we'll try to get to them. So, all right. I do want to talk about the State Department stuff, but I want to talk about, you moved out here in Pacific Northwest. Your wife got a job,
Yeah.
and so you packed up the family. You guys
Yep.
have a young son who at the
Yep.
time was 6?
He was 7.
7. Okay.
Yeah, 7 or 8.
So you guys moved out here. You got a job teaching school music program at, where are you now?
Yeah, when we first moved, I was teaching half-time at West Woodland Elementary School and half-time at Northgate Elementary. And for the last few years, I've been full-time at West Woodland.
And in between that, you're gigging all over the place and doing private lessons. And
Yeah, thanks to you.
yeah, and, well,
Playing a
yeah.
lot.
And also, you've been doing some teaching for Seattle Jazz Ed as well. You
Yeah.
have in the past.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
lots of, you've done private lessons and then just been on the scene playing with as many people as you can.
Yeah, you know, I was so happy to move to a place that has a jazz scene, you know, and a good jazz scene. I mean, obviously, we can all say what we're going to say right now. You know, 2020 was a horrible nightmare. It continues to be a nightmare for the arts. But, you know, it was hard because in New York, I was also doing a lot of teaching. And, you know, New York is really, you know, it's cliche, but it is the city that never sleeps. I mean, like, if you want to plug yourself in to the music scene, the night scene, it is there. You know, every single night of the week, there's a million shows going on.
Yeah, all different styles of music, too.
All different styles. And, like, it was hard because, like, I was, you know, I had moved up to the Bronx and, you know, I had a teaching job where I was waking up early in the morning. So it's like you make choices. And it was hard for me to, like, get to Smalls or get to jam sessions. But, you know, like here it's a little bit similar, but it's so important that if you choose to play jazz, that you are actually playing with people, playing jazz with people. There is no substitution for playing with other musicians. So that is a priority of mine. I can't say that I go out every single week or every single night, but I do make a point to go to the Owl and Thistle, go to the Angry Beaver, you know, like places where jazz is happening, because that's important, you know, and it's good for the soul. And, you know, I'm just happy that those kinds of things exist. So hats off to, like, you know, Holmberg and Verlinde and, you know, all these cats who are, like, keeping it alive.
Not right now, but yes.
Not right now. And you, of course.
Yeah.
Kandi.
Well, I'm curious, and, you know, I remember when I first met Ollie, you know, he was talking to me about the pace of life on the East Coast and the pace of life here. I've lived here my whole life. I've been very fortunate to travel other places, but, you know, I'm curious as to your impression growing up and living your entire life in the East Coast and the New York area and that scene, and then moving here. I mean, yes, it's a good jazz scene and we're very fortunate, but in terms of, like, just the pace of life and living and people, what's your impression?
My impression. And yeah, I should say that, New York City is really like the only place I've lived as an adult before I moved here. So it's the only context I have. But I would say, you know, I'm almost 50 years old and I have a family. Like, life is easier out here than New York. I mean, New York is a tough place to live, you know, for anybody. You know, it's expensive. You know, it's hard to get around. Like, you know, like sometimes your commute is really long and can be frustrating. You know, I like to think of New York City as, like, you know, it's like a roaring ocean. You know, it's just like there's so much going on there. And that's a great thing. Like, artistically, culturally, it is just like, I feel like it's like Mecca. You know, there's waves and waves of great musicians of all genres, you know, like rolling through New York and making New York their home and trying to make a go of it. So it's a huge pool of musicians.
Which is right now, if you see, I mean, everyone, all of us, particularly as musicians, I'm sure we see, because we know people that live there, the artistic and the cultural scene there and around the world, but particularly in the U.S., is getting decimated right now, which really, really is awful to see.
Yes.
So I know, you know, like the work that Spike Wilder's doing with Smalls, I mean, things like that are going on, and they'll be able to hopefully weather the storm, but it's really, really brutal for everybody right now.
It's brutal. But yeah, the pace of life in New York, you know, it can be exhausting. I mean, I won't lie. Like, I felt that it would be a nice change of pace, you know, to try something other than New York. You know, like I said, New York, it's a special place for jazz. I think that it's, you know, like I said, any night of the week you can hear incredible music all over town, no matter what genre you want to listen to, no matter who you want to study with. I mean, like, everyone is accessible. it can be intimidating. I know a lot of people who moved to New York and then left. They're like, this is not for me. For me, it was always my home. So my whole family is there. My wife's whole family is there. So it's like, we don't know any different. Like, so in that sense, like, maybe I do take that for granted. Like walking out your door and like, there's 7 jazz clubs, I mean, like, that's not normal, when you live anywhere else in the world, so like, I do feel incredibly fortunate that I was able to like make my home there, and I knew like when I went to the new school, like, this is what I need to do. Like, if I want to be a jazz drummer, this is the place I need to go, because I can study with all these people, and these are the people that play the way I want to play. And, you kind of become part of that whole scene, and it's a hustle, There were many times when I was, living paycheck to paycheck, and it was like, oh man, like, all right, here we go, can of beans another night. It's like there are a lot of people just struggling to make it.
So it's like pandemic life all the time over there.
All the time. Exactly. It's hard.
Sorry. Okay. Any questions? No questions so far. Okay, cool. Well, there's still a bunch of stuff I want to cover, and we're getting kind of close to the end here.
Sure.
So I want to talk a little bit about your State Department tours that you did. It was for Jazz at Lincoln Center, and so you would go out as a quartet, or what was the project?
Yeah, as a quartet. So this is the Jazz Ambassador Program that has been going in the United States since the 50s. Duke Ellington was doing it, Louis Armstrong, Dave Brubeck, and it's an initiative that is through the State Department. And this is, like, a lot of people don't know, but these are funds that exist, and the State Department has this program, and they run it every year. They just need an arts organization to kind of back it up and help with the sort of filtering process to get musicians. So Jazz at Lincoln Center had it for a few years, and that was really fortuitous. Again, like, sometimes it's just right place, right time, because there could have been any number of people doing those gigs, but I was really lucky to get a chance.
What were some of the countries? Sorry to interrupt. Some of the countries that you visited with the program.
Went to about 40 different countries. The first tour was Russia and Central Asia, and I thought I knew something about geography. I saw this itinerary, and I was baffled. I had never heard of some of the countries and cities that we were going to. Like, I remember doing like a Google Earth search, and it was like, whoa, it was mind-blowing. We went to Eastern Europe. We were in Slovenia, Slovakia. We spent a lot of time in Cyprus, the Turkish and Greek island in the Mediterranean. And
sounds rough.
It was really, I remember our bass player, Ari Roland, because he was like our band expert about countries and politics and diplomacy. And I remember we were about to go on the road. It was like Eastern Europe and Cyprus. And he was like, guys, this is going to be like a vacation. And he was right. I mean, like, when we weren't playing gigs, it's like we were getting tours of like these beautiful beaches and stuff. It's like, it was really something. But no, there were experiences on those tours that were like life changing, and
also, from what you said, life threatening as well. There has been some kind of touch and go situations.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that the riskiest stuff that I had done was in Syria. And we were in Syria when the rebellion started. We were not like right there, but like we were not far, when it started to bubble up. This was after Egypt and, the Arab Spring. And, remember we were riding in the van to our gig. It was at a university. And everyone was like, anyone read, the Herald this morning? And it's like, they were like, yeah, we're going basically to like the heart of the conflict. So I was like, oh, wow, okay.
So you feathered the bass drum all night long. You didn't get above a certain...
Yeah, no bombs. Is that what you're getting at? Yeah. Nice one. Yeah, no, but it was a little scary, and there were moments like when we were in the Middle East, when on a Friday, which is, the holy day, where things would get a little like, we were walking through Damascus, and like suddenly there'd be like 10 guys like brawling on the street, and we're like, whoa, there was some moments there for sure, but I would say like, my takeaway from those experiences of traveling to these countries that a lot of people don't get to go to and see is that, the media spins things in a certain way. and you've done a lot of traveling too, particularly in the Middle East and like these kind of hard hit places, but you're not seeing the whole picture. They're like, the media is showing you things that, and I'm sure like people would argue with me that of course there's legitimate conflict and problems in a lot of these places, but on the ground, they're people just like you and me. They want a roof over their heads. They want to feel cared for. They want food. They want love, and more often than not, the experiences that we had as a band were like, we were invited to people's houses, and like you're ushered into someone's house, and these are people who might have nothing. And like, they bring out like a feast to end all feasts because, they want you to feel at home in their house. Like, I think there's a saying, treat your guests better than you treat your family, So we were like walking on rose petals, on these tours. So that was a wonderful experience, all of it.
Well, so I'm curious, with all these different countries that you visited, I know you interacted with a lot of other school programs and other musicians. And what was from your opinion, and not know if this is the right way to say this, but the caliber of jazz musicians? Did you see a lot of other musicians that could really play well in these other countries?
We were in parts of the world where, it was striking that like jazz was not really something that they understood. It's not like we were in Western Europe, we were in Central Asia, and actually there was an experience that I had in Kazakhstan where I didn't know much about the culture there, but we were invited to a middle school music program. It wasn't like a general ed, it was music school. But, we were like all kind of road weary, and like, I think we got there early in the morning, and like we were tired, and it was like, okay, like music school, let's go. I mean, I didn't have any expectations. And they're like, we want to play our music for you, So we were sitting there listening to their big band. These are like 13-year-old kids. And I kid you not, like, these kids were swinging their asses off. Like, am I allowed to say that? Yeah, it was just like, I couldn't believe it. I was watching this drummer who, again, I think he was 13 years old. He was just back there, like, laying it down, like Sam Woodyard or like Papa Joe Jones, and we're in Kazakhstan. And that was striking to me. And what it came down to was their teacher, and that speaks to music education. Like, it was a Russian musician who had settled there and was teaching these kids how to really play. Obviously, whatever he was doing it right. And it was really another emotional experience for me, because we were like getting a tour of their school. We were walking around, and we were in a stairwell, and I saw a picture of the director of the school, this gentleman who we were with, and Arnie Lawrence, like next to him, arm in arm. And I was like, of course. Like Arnie, like who, I worked in Arnie's band week after week, at the new school, like playing gigs with him, and him and Herman Foster, the great piano player, Satoshi Inoue, a great guitarist. Like, we were all in this band together with Arnie, and Arnie just taught us all, like, just the feeling of jazz, and it just made so much sense to me, like when I saw his picture there, and it was like, yeah, it's beautiful. It was like the stars, like, aligned. So there are people out there where you least expect them, to really be inspiring kids and other musicians. So, and then there were moments when we would be, we would play with other musicians where they had no jazz context, but like we would make it work. All right, let's play a blues, or like let's play Caravan, so we would play Caravan, and they would just use their ears, and they would use their instruments, and they would just follow along, and it'd be awesome.
Right on. Well, we're getting close to that time here. Want to ask you, as Stefan Schatz in 2020, having all these experiences, playing and having these great, wonderful teachers and gigging all over the place. Yeah. If you were going to impart advice to musicians coming up now that wanted to learn how to play and be a good person and a good musician, what are some things that you think are very beneficial that you kind of hold near and dear to your heart now?
Yeah. Well, like I said earlier, I would say one thing is, you have to play this music with other people, no matter what the circumstance is. We're all in this situation where, you know, it's hard to play with other musicians in person. You know, like I said, there's no substitution for playing live, but, you know, this is a life, you know, that you've chosen to play jazz or play music, and you have to pour yourself into it. You know, and I think that for me, the thing that really has stuck with me is that, you know, you can't go into this thinking like the world owes you something. You know, that is the last thing that should be on your mind. I mean, none of us are doing this to get rich. You should do this because you love it, because you can't think of anything else to do that's more fun. You know, if there are resources in your town, I mean, now with like Skype and all these other things, like if there's someone that you want to study with, reach out to these people, you know, become their friends. You know, these are just human beings, you know, because we all have to support each other. And for me, you know, meeting older musicians, like the older generation of musicians, has been extremely important. You know, like Jimmy Lovelace, the great drummer, and Marvin Boogaloo Smith, and Vernell Fournier, and Art Blakey, Elvin Jones, all these people that I got to listen to, you know, they created this music, you know, and like I think that it's really important to understand where this music came from before you decide that, you know, you're going to take it in some direction. Like, this is dance music. So, like, that's near and dear to my heart. So, like, whenever I play, I hope that it grooves. I hope that it swings. And, like, that's important to me.
Right on. Well, we got to wrap up here. So before we close, thank you everybody for watching. If you've been enjoying this series, the live stream performances and the interviews, feel free to make a donation. You can either do that via Venmo or PayPal or sending a check. The information's at the beginning of the post here. We want to say a huge thank you to your wife Shira and Julian for bringing you out here to the Northwest. So I know New York's loss is our gain here, and the scene has been greatly improved by having you here. So thank you for joining us today as our guest. Thank you to our listeners, and stick around because in an hour we're going to be back to play some more music for you, and today we're going to be working on some of Stefan's original compositions. So stick around. Stay tuned. Thank you.